woke, I couldn't stop hearing teardrops on my ceiling, falling from the eyes of the beautiful angel light.
Hello everyone, and we are live from West Palm Beach, Florida. Welcome to the episode of My Price is My Life, brought to you by our sponsors at American Independence Gold. Get started on your gold IRA today or purchase gold and silver bars and coinage at o'keefemediagold.com. Take action, get the facts, and protect your future. o'keefemediagold.com. That's o'keefemediagold.com. Today's guest, I'm very excited about this one because we are live and this is going to be incredible, is General Michael Flynn, a soldier who rose from a working class family in Rhode Island. And I know Rhode Island because I've done a lot of sailing in Rhode Island, so I'm going to talk to him about that. He became a 3-star Army Lieutenant General, serving with over 33 years in military intelligence. Started as a combat in Grenada. He served on the front lines also in Iraq, Afghanistan, and later led the Defense Intelligence Agency under President Obama. And then in 2017, he became National Security Advisor to President Trump, only to find himself at the center of one of the most explosive political and legal battles in modern history. And I have a lot to talk to him about after my interactions with the FBI on 2 occasions and the intelligence community in general. General Flynn details a story about service, sacrifice, and the high cost of speaking truth to power in various books which I have all read, and those include Pardon of Innocence, written most recently, a book about Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare, which I read in the last few days, and a book called Field of Flight, How We Can Fight the Global War Against Radical Islam. And these books we're going to talk about here in just a minute. He details his stories in these books, and he joins us today. General Flynn, welcome to the Price is My Life podcast.
Yeah, great. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm so glad that you guys were persistent getting me here. So appreciate it. You got a beautiful setup, and I am a huge fan of everything that you have done in your life, which is amazing.
Well, thank you. We have a lot to talk about, and I wanted to start because I read your book, and a friend of mine, Laura Logan, actually gave me this book, and I wanted to start. There's so much to talk about, but we're just going to start somewhere. And, you know, I like to say my price is my life, meaning that I try not to be compromised. But most people's price, if they're honest, is actually their children's life. And you wrote in this book, and I'm going to open it up to this section where you talk about your son. And I've actually met your son. We've hung out. You've talked about your son and pleading guilty to a crime you didn't commit, something that I have in common. But here, I'm just going to read a passage from your book, from page 180. Quote, "My son would have been next on their hit list. Those bastards wouldn't stop until they chewed off every piece of meat on my body like piranhas. It was hard enough that I could barely speak with Michael," that's your son. "My lawyers told me I had to communicate with him through them. It was hell. They were going after my son, and I could not let that happen." Talk about that.
Yeah, wow. It's emotional. Just even hearing those words stated again. Michael's probably watching this show right now too. So for everybody out there in the audience that's paying attention, this is this is a big deal for all of us. So for me and for my family, and Michael specifically, and I have 2 sons. Matthew's the other one. My wife Lori. Michael has had experiences with mental health issues, you know, for a long period of his life, and so as I was going through this hell with the FBI, the Department of Justice, the Mueller investigation team, finding myself in a place where I was kind of alone on an island, and I felt like I knew that I hadn't done anything wrong, despite what they're going after you for, what they're telling you, and what the media is shouting to the hills about. They found the one weakness in my life, which was my family, and specifically my son, and more specifically my son Michael. And Michael and I have, obviously father-son relationship. We worked together very closely prior to this mess that these people caused our whole country to go through. But that weakness for me was to attack my son and to go after his challenges that he was, had always, been through. It was very private, as mental health issues are in a family, very private. And now it's become actually public, and Michael has taken it and stepped up now to where he's actually helping other people. So I think that that's a really honorable and noble thing that Michael has decided to do. But when they did that to me, I mean, they're talking about, 15, 20, 25 years in prison for something that I knew I didn't do. And now it's been, I mean, even the FBI agents that came into my office, they actually wrote down he wasn't lying, right? So it's just incredible what...
They're talking about you not lying.
They're talking about me not lying, right? I mean, they actually wrote it down after that very famous 2 FBI agents sent to the White House by James Comey, who I think he goes in front of Congress tomorrow, or gets indicted tomorrow, maybe the next day, the 9th, I think. But this issue of attacking somebody's family, my price is my life. Well, for me, I served overseas in combat in different places, and I signed on the dotted line, and I knew that serving in our armed forces, the potential for giving your life for the country was very real, especially in some of the places I went to. But as I fought this war, these battles inside of our own country against our own government, I realized that my price was my family, and I just wasn't going to put up with it anymore. And that was a weak point for me. So I learned about that. My family's learned about it. Certainly Michael has learned about it, my wife. And I would just say that for anybody that's out there, and there's a lot of people that go through this, a lot of people who make decisions based on the challenges that they face with a variety of things. Some people do it because they're going to lose their job. They do it because they're going to lose, their name's going to be in the media. That I didn't care about. What I cared about was my family. And I just, at that moment when that happened, and they came to me and they actually told me that this is what was going to happen. They are not only going to charge you, they're going to drag your son into this.
Who's they?
They being my lawyers and the prosecution team of the Mueller investigation. So they actually said, here's what's going to happen. So this is like about probably a week and a half, 2 weeks prior to me pleading guilty back in 2017. And I talked to my wife and we said, okay, we're sort of done. I mean, at this point in time, we had already, sort of all the other aspects of what happens to somebody when you go through this. Your bills mounting. We had sold our home, but then all that didn't matter. What mattered is when they came after my son, and I was like, I'm not going to let this happen. And so then it was, okay, what's the recourse, right? And the recourse is you're going to have to plead guilty to something that you didn't do. Right, and my lawyers knew that I hadn't done anything. My lawyers, the first set of lawyers that I had were terrible, and I dumped them eventually.
Was that Covington and Burling? Covington and
Burling. I dumped them eventually, but that was a big decision. It's a huge decision. It was made really, with a great deal of faith, and my wife and I, speaking to each other, right? We've been together for a long time, but it was with a great deal of faith in God and just knowing that, we'll get through this. We'll get through this. It was kind of our theme. And no matter what, we have our bond as a family. And then, for those that get further into the book, and Michael has been a beneficiary of this, as I have, as all of those in my family have, we have a huge family. And certainly on the Flynn side and on my wife's side, the Andrade side, we have a huge family. I'm one of 9 children, 9 brothers and sisters, a bunch of cousins and nephews and nieces, and everybody knows Uncle Mike. Everybody knows Brother Mike. Same with my wife's family. So our families, which a lot of times when these kinds of things happen, James, families can break apart. Families can have a really difficult time. And we made it our sort of part of our journey was to keep that binding of the strength of our family together, because we have a very strong faith in God, and we're from you mentioned from up in Rhode Island. We were raised as Catholics in in the small state of Rhode Island. Actually, very all Democrats. When you want to talk political ideologies, I was the Democrat until recently. I never really gave much care about politics, and frankly, a lot of my brothers and sisters, they don't either. Our background is about service to the military. We have a long legacy of service to the military or law enforcement. My father served in World War II in Korea and was retired from the military. My father-in-law, great guy, George Andrade, he's a retired state trooper. And I have a lot of family that are law enforcement. So our grassroots component of our lives is very grassroots, and it's very service-oriented, and it's very small-town family roots. And so this is some of the conversations that we had when we were making this decision for me to plead guilty to a felony that I didn't.
This is from your book. Quote: "The worst part for her, was your wife, was the night I made my calls to everyone I had come to a decision. I was telling our loved ones that I was going to have to say something that wasn't true, that this was the only way. We had no choice. The next day we went to court and I pled guilty to a crime I didn't commit." Now, but we have a lot in common in the sense that I did the same thing. It was a Class B misdemeanor in federal court in 2010. And I guess I've been deposed since then, and people always ask me, O'Keefe, do I regret that? And I would say, well, it's not so much regret. I learned from it. I probably won't do that again. Do you have regrets about that?
I do to a degree, but I can't live with regret. I don't think any of us should. If you live with it, it's just going to eat you up. I did learn an awful lot. An awful lot.
What did you learn?
I learned about the law. So I learned about the law. I learned about the levels of even more than I thought, but the levels of corruption in our own government that are severe. I learned about the sort of the traitorous networks that do exist inside of elements of our national security state. That's very real. I've learned to use discernment more than judgment, I think, and I think that discernment is something that I didn't think about a lot prior to all this. And I think discernment it's people go discernment, judgment, they're different. So I've learned a lot about discernment and really thinking through what it is that we're facing. And there's a strategic thing that we're facing. We maybe can talk about some of that. And certainly the things that you face as families. One of the outcomes of this was I began to have a conversation with the American people during this period of time. So for these 3 or 4 years that I was going through this just absolute hell, this persecution for no reason other than they were trying to undermine and usurp a duly elected president, President Trump, and take the country down a very dangerous path. I started having this conversation with the American people, and actually the American people engaged me first. And how that came about was my sister Barbara was helping us out, again, family coming together to figure out how to get through this mess. And my sister Barbara became she was kind of our legal defense fund guru. She at the time, we were living in Rhode Island. She at the time was living out in California. And so she became this legal defense guru to kind of help us manage. And she started sending me these boxes of letters that people were sending to her with a small check, right? Or in some cases, a couple of dollars and some change. It was fascinating. But they were all with short letters. Some of them were long letters. And the first box that she sent me, and she said, "Michael, I'm going to send you these things. You're not going to believe it." She read them all, and she was great. And she goes, "You got to read these letters." So I started to read them, my wife and I, at home. And they were letters to me, and people were telling me about the challenges that they were facing in their own lives against a weaponized government. Some of it was local, some of it was state level, but a lot of it was federal level. I mean, people, and they were giving me their cases, their federal cases. They were giving me these, just bleeding their hearts out to me about what was happening to them, and could I help them? And here I am in the midst of fighting
your own wars,
my own wars, boy, big time, and trying to be a cooperative witness at the time, because they were really trying to get me to turn on President Trump. You know, I went through 19 different interviews with the Mueller investigation team, which I don't think I've ever mentioned that. I'm not even sure I've ever written about that, to be honest with you. So maybe that's new.
Interviews with
the Mueller investigation team, where I met with Mueller. I met with Andrew Weissman.
What was that like?
I'll talk about that. But those letters were heartbreaking. They brought me and my wife to tears. They were letters that were trying to bring joy to our lives. Most of them, I'd say 75, 80% of them had some sort of a faith-based message. The one that I've always remembered is one of the first ones that I've gotten from a woman who was describing where I was. And she put it in a way, and she made the analogy of where America was at. And I've used this in many times when I've spoken to different groups of people, and it's the whole Psalm 23. And yea, that I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, right? And she described that I was in that valley. She was telling me, this is where I think you are, and trust in the Lord that things are going to be okay. But then she went on in her letter to say that she believed that this is where the nation was at. This is where our country was at. We were not on the precipice of collapsing as a constitutional republic. We were actually already in a place of darkness, and that unless we figured out a way out of it, our country was going to continue down this dark path and stay in that valley of the shadow of death. And what I learned from it, and now back to the comment that you made earlier about what do you learn. One of the things that I learned is that you can actually come out of this valley. You can actually get out of the valley of the shadow of death by things that you have done in your life and what you're doing in your efforts, and that is to fight for the truth. Right? We have to stick together. We have to understand what is it that we're facing, because we're facing a lot of different things, and deception, propaganda, covert operations directed against us by our own government. The letters, though, and I appreciate the fact that you had spoken to me earlier about the different books that you read that I've written.
50,000 letters, was it? Something like
100,000. So over 100,000.
You wrote, I think you wrote that you wrote 50,000 letters back.
So I got that first batch.
Like you hand wrote?
I hand wrote them. And when I'm going around the country, people will come up to me and they'll bring the letter. They'll go, "Do you remember writing this?" And I'll like, "Oh my God."
Did you address their specific issues, or did you write them a general gratitude? Or
sometimes I would generally say thank you for your support and generosity and your kindness, but sometimes I would write like a long letter back, addressing whatever their issue was. And in some cases, I would address things like, they were telling me what their problem was, and I would try to give them some ideas about where to go.
How to solve
the problem. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not at the time I was facing my own persecution, but I felt compelled because, that's my way. I mean,
people do that with us all the time. We get 100 tips a day. Please come to Wichita to expose my municipal government, and we can't possibly help all these people. So maybe they just felt good hearing from you.
Yeah, and I know that they did, because they would write back, and in many cases, I still to this day, some I have as pen pals, and I love that because I know in a couple of examples they're older people, and they're probably alone, and they're probably watching things going on television, or they still get a newspaper delivered to their door maybe, and they still confide in me the things that I actually, some of them I've actually reached out to verbally, and I've spoken to them. I would call them up. So many fascinating stories. One of them I spoke to this morning. Actually, I spoke to a gentleman this morning.
These are all letters that you wrote.
These
not
are letters.
Emails.
Yep. Not emails. These are letters, and I hand wrote over 100,000.
Takes a long time.
No, it's like but it was like, for me, it was it allowed me to give something back to something that I felt like, I felt like these people were these represented. They didn't represent just those few, 100,000. These people represented the millions and millions of Americans in this country that all feel the same way that and what I was going through and what my family was going through. They all, and especially today, many people are now starting to see what was happening. And it's like I said, it's not 100,000, it's millions. And those millions of people, they need to know that they have champions out there in this country. And I don't know whether I ever wanted to be in this position, nor I don't think you ever felt like you wanted to be in the position that you're in. But this country needs champions, and we need fighters. And there are a lot of fighters out there. They just don't have the notoriety, or they weren't put into the spotlight like guys like you and I have been put into. And instead of wilting on the vine and stepping away and going, I'm not going to go do that, I'm done. No, I think that we have to have people that are standing up strong for this country.
I think that in many ways, people like you, and to a lesser degree me, are fortunate in the sense that we are public figures. We can raise funds to a certain extent, whereas the person who is unknown,
right,
they have a better chance of taking out. You mentioned discernment versus judgment. What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, I think that I look at a guy and I say, you meet somebody and you make a judgment call about them, right? You say good guy, bad guy, whatever. I think discernment to me is actually much deeper, and it takes more time to really step back and think about what it is that you are about to make a decision about. So judgment is can be quick, can be passing, it can be right, wrong. I think discernment is one where you have to get it right, and you have to really consider what it is that you are about to step into. And I've been quick to judge, as we say sometimes, right? The phrase "quick to judge." I've been quick to judge, and I've been wrong. I will tell you that my gut, my instincts, if I haven't followed them later on, I say, God, I should have followed my gut on that, because that was my gut told me this, and but I didn't do it. So I made an incorrect judgment. Whereas discernment, if I give much more thought to some issue, which to me is much more powerful, that's really where I think discernment kicks in.
Discernment, I'm the same way. I pray for discernment after what I have been through. But it's almost going back to the prices of my life and your family. One guy asked me yesterday, James, how do you trust anybody when you have the entire force of the we'll get into this later, but the deep state, the administrative state, the big pharma companies are coming down on you, and they'll leverage any weakness of any man that stands beside you. How do you, what type of people can you find around you?
Yeah.
Perfect angels? How do you deal with that?
Yeah. Well, number one, I think for me is family.
Family.
Families for sure, because I come from a big family, and like I've said, and our family was raised as a very tough.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about I got this book here.
Yeah.
I was most interested in the details about your upbringing. Rhode Island, which is just north of Middletown, was it?
Right.
Which is
Rhode
just
Island,
north of.
I always say Rhode Island is the smallest state in the Union. It's a 1-hour drive, but it's got 400 miles of coastline. Newport, Middletown area. Newport's the more well-known area of Rhode Island. Of course, Providence is.
Middletown is just north of Newport.
Right.
And you're a hectic family of 11. This is from your book, The Field of Flight. Quote, "It was the turmoil and my own dangerous behavior as an adolescent that led me to my ability to get inside our enemies' heads." Turmoil in the home amongst all the people.
Yeah, turmoil in the home, turmoil in my neighborhood where I grew up with the group of kids that I grew up with. We're sort of ruffians, all athletes, all played sports at some level. But definitely in the home. because of so many kids. You know,
A
we had
one-bedroom house, one-bathroom
well,
house.
it was one bathroom. It's an
With 9
amazing
kids.
story. I think I tell it in there a little bit where it's a 1,200 square foot home, 11 people, 2 of course with my parents, 1 bathroom. The bathroom wasn't a bathtub. It was a shower head, and in a little enclosed, like very small closet. So you'd stand in there, toilet, sink, and so during the morning, which my father was a military guy. You know, my father was he retired from the Army as a master sergeant, goes in and becomes a teller in a bank, and it's just so funny thinking about it. But we would be lined up at the bathroom, so there'd be somebody on the john, somebody brushing their teeth, somebody waiting outside the door, and somebody literally in the shower. And you would just you would move like
military
like
precision.
a military operation. Yeah,
9 kids.
9 children.
And how long of it was it? An hour, or how much time do you have to get that?
Not much. My father was a funny guy. You know, was tough Irish guy, and he would come back and he would always say, you know, if you live to you're 75 and you sleep 8 hours a day, you're going to sleep for 25 years. So get your asses out of bed now. And you know, like you think about that for a second, what I just said, right? It's pretty staggering because everybody always goes, get a good night's rest. My father wasn't like that. My father was like, get up, get out, and you're going to work. And so we had, you know, newspaper routes. We worked in restaurants. We worked at beaches. We did whatever we could as kids, but that's what we were going to do. And our house was operated like almost like a military machine. And my mother was great. My mother was a beautiful woman, and she was all about education. Because she was a very, very smart woman. And Helen, yeah, my mother Helen.
Was she also Irish?
She was, and my mother was. Thank God that she decided to marry Charlie and have kids, because my mother, graduating from high school at the era of World War II, she was the salutatorian and valedictorian of her high school class, and was given a full ride into an Ivy League college, and she turned it down because she wanted to wait for my father to come back from World War II, from Germany, where he fought, and marry him. So, and she always wanted to have children, and so thank God. And here we are.
Your parents, when did they pass away?
My father died in the mid '90s. My mother died 2014, so a little over 10 years ago.
What led you to the intelligence field? How did that happen? You talked a little bit about how you get inside this phrase, inside the enemy's heads. What made you that way?
Yeah, it's funny. So two things, and I tell this now, and I think I realize it. I realize it now more. But when my mother was very, very religious, a wonderful woman. She named us all after saints. Okay, so I'll just tell this story because I didn't know it at the time, and I certainly didn't know it as a child growing up. But I fell into this, as your name can matter, the definition of your name, right? And so my mother had miscarriages here and there, and so my particular birth was uncertain. I was born on Christmas Eve. She names me Michael, but because my birth was uncertain, she also named me Thomas. So my middle name is Thomas, and so my mother named us after first and middle names after saints, and so kind of put that in a bin. Later on, when I was coming out of high school, going into college, I went to the University of Rhode Island, which is a state university across the bay from my house. I always wanted to go into the Army. I knew it from the time I was a kid. Wanted to go into the military, and so I ended up with a ROTC scholarship, and I actually talk about it in the book how that occurred. The people that impact your life. So I had a couple of people that I met at the University of Rhode Island in the ROTC department, and one of whom was the professor of military science. The lieutenant colonel had been a special forces guy, had come out of Vietnam era, and he had a very brave guy. And he was infantry, but he got into the intelligence business later on in his career. So he was a lieutenant colonel. He had about 20 years in. And he sat me down, and he looked at everything. I was into athletics. I was a decent student. And he just said, you know what you need to think about? You need to think about going into the intelligence career field. And specifically, at that time, he said, the field of electronic warfare is growing. And he said that I think that that's the direction that I would recommend you go into. And I was like, really? Yeah, because I was figuring I'll go in the infantry or, one of the combat arms branches. And so he goes, no, he goes, I think that's what you should do. And so I also said to him during that same conversation, I said, boy, I really like to go to the 82nd Airborne Division, which was my first unit that I ended up going to. He goes, no problem. He goes, they have a great capabilities, and it's a great unit. And so I think I can help you do that. He goes, you got to do really well, in your grades and the various ROTC programs, which I always excelled at. All the hands-on stuff I was always really good at, and the leadership stuff I always had a lot of fun. And I think a lot of that leadership stuff came out of.
What did the guy who was recruiting you? What did he see in you that made him say you should think about electronic warfare?
Yeah, in the things that we did, and I guess he saw I was really good with hands-on stuff, and my time as an athlete and being and leading teams, which we always did in ROTC as well. We'd always be put into situations. We had a good ROTC program actually at a state university, which is unusual at that time, post-Vietnam. I think what he saw in me was somebody that just thought differently. A lot of people can go into the infantry. If you say, I'm going to go in the infantry, you can go in and typically, but it's not, it's not for everybody. And that was something that I thought I would do. But I think he saw it and said, you ought to really think about this. So I went and studied it. I actually went and studied, what was this about? The intelligence field, counterintelligence, electronic warfare, electronic support measures, signals intelligence, imagery intelligence. At that time, we had all those things. They're just not as robust as they are today. So for a guy that had really only seen me for a year, let's say, when we had that conversation about what I was going to ask for, he saw something in me, and he had 20 years in the service. And my father, when I went back, because my father was still alive at the time, when I went back and told my father about it, he said, great. He said, I think it's wonderful. It's a great thing. He said, go for it. My father really, I think, liked the fact that somebody took interest in me, and then my father taught me other things about going into the service, and they were very important things and very important ideas about how to act and how to operate when you're in the military.
What do you think your father would say about all the stuff that's happened to you over the last 8 to 10 years?
Yeah, if he could legitimately break out of his grave, he would break out. He would jump right out of his grave today. My father was.
Would it surprise him?
I don't think it would surprise him, neither him nor my mother, because they were both people who stayed on top of things. They were both very, they read a lot. They would talk to us a lot. We would have, we had in our like little tiny dining room, if you will. So you come in the front door of our house. I mentioned the size of our house. Our dining room table was a picnic table. Okay, it was a wooden picnic table with these nylon chairs at either end for my mother and father, and it was attached benches to the picnic table. So we would sit around that picnic table, and we would have debates about everything. And my mother was very into local politics at the time. She was also the president of the Right to Life movement in our area. Movement. Huge. My mother was huge pro-life, head of it for a while. Mm-hmm. During the days before Roe v. Wade, right? And then even Roe v. Wade. She took me down to the first march in Washington, D.C. But we would sit around as brothers and sisters and as family members, and anybody that came in that door, they had to be prepared to get into a debate or an argument or a fight, at times with my brothers and sisters. That was just our nature. That was the way we were. So my father and mother today, they would not be surprised. They would be standing up and fighting. If they had the energy to do it, they would be doing it right here with us.
There's so much to go through, but just as an aside, you're from Rhode Island. I'm an avid sailor, and I think you wrote somewhere in one of your books, it may have been this one, that you jumped off a bridge. Was it 75 feet?
Yeah.
Tall?
The Seconic
Bridge, and then a police officer someone thought you committed suicide.
Yeah.
But you were just. What was the reason you were jumping off the bridge? Just for sport?
Yeah. It was it was one of those dares, right? Dare, I dare you. And there was a place called Island Park. So anybody that's watching any of the audience that's watching in the state of Rhode Island, on the island of Aquidneck, in the town of Portsmouth, there's a little bridge, and we used to go over and jump on that bridge all the time. It's an Island Park Bridge, and it's a pretty good jump. It's about probably 30 feet. Boats pass under it, and we used to jump off it all the time. Right adjacent to it, right around the corner, you can see it from that bridge, is the Saconnet Bridge. The Saconnet Bridge is actually the bridge that goes off the island and goes into the next town. It connects you to the mainland. And that bridge is a good-sized bridge. It's about 75 feet, give or take,
75 feet.
Pretty high.
That's high.
And so we were there one day, and my brother-in-law at the time, who's deceased now, Kyle, for anybody, maybe his son is Eddie is watching. Kyle and I said, let's go. People said, you're not gonna. So we said, we're going to go over there. So we actually parked at the bottom of the bridge. There's a little road that goes down the bottom and comes up to like a little beachhead. And we walked up, just in our shorts, we walked up to the side, got on the road. It's a highway. We walked along the highway on a sidewalk on the bridge, and we stood on the stanchions of the bridge and jumped. And we generally knew how deep it was because big boats passed.
And currents go through there.
Currents go through there. Big boats pass through there. So it's a pretty, the depth of that area is pretty good depth. And so took a leap. And both of us were strong at the time, and made it. And so what happened was somebody reported us for jumping off the bridge, thinking that hey, these guys, I think these people are committing suicide. So as soon as we got to the beach, by the time we literally swam to the shore, a state trooper had come down to that same area where the car was parked, and he got out. Of course, we're swimming up to the side of the water there of the beach, and he looks at us and he's like, "Are you guys out of your minds? What the hell are you kids doing?" And so he took our names and took a little report down, and he was a good guy, and we just said, "Sorry, trooper, we generally jump off of the Island Park Bridge." He goes, "Get the hell out of here, go home. I'm gonna let the guy." He said somebody will know about it. And my father knew about it.
How old were you
at the time? I think I was probably 16, 17 years old, so high school.
And how old were you when you jumped into the water in Grenada? We'll get to that story later. But was that
yeah. When I jumped in the water in Grenada to go after those couple of guys, I was a lieutenant, so I was probably 24.
24 years old. We'll get to that here. We're going to take a break in a minute, but I've sailed those waters. Block Island.
Yeah.
You spent a lot of time on Block Island.
Absolutely.
Take that
surfed
ferry
over in Block Island.
from
Yep.
Point Judith.
Yeah.
The new harbor, the old harbor.
Yeah.
I've sailed the Block Island. A lot of fog coming in on my sailboat, but coming around that Point Judith, point of refuge, is it?
Right.
Spent a lot of time, and that you're a water person.
Big time. I grew up on an island generally, and I read about my mom teaching us all how to swim. It's like you were going to learn how to swim before you maybe ate, but you're going to learn how to swim before you walk. And my mom used to have a unique way of teaching us how to swim, which is, as babies, she'd dump us in the pool, and you'd have to come up, right? And then she would be there to, of course, yank you up if you didn't make it, but generally you'd make it up. And then after a bit, you'd learn how to swim. And I think as each child grew up, the next children would teach each other and help each other, but we all learned how to swim.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes, and we're going to talk about Grenada and then to present day.
We're standing up to the powers that tried to discredit us, silence us, smear us, raid us, and throw us in jail. They've awakened a sleeping giant. We're building a movement of transparency and accountability in both the public and private sectors, because we run from nothing, we hide from nothing. And when you join and get your full access pass, you fuel a movement for truth. We are the media now.
This is James O'Keefe. You know me for exposing the truth and holding the powerful accountable. But today, I want to talk to you about protecting your own freedom, starting with your finances. Right now, the warning signs are everywhere. The Fed continues to print money,
Interest rates and inflation remain high, and everywhere you look, your hard-earned money just doesn't go as far as it used to. That's not your imagination, it's today's reality. If central banks are loading up on gold, why not you? That's why I've now partnered with American Independence Gold. They're veteran-owned, and proceeds from every sale go to Tunnel to Towers, supporting our first responders and heroes. And listen, right now, the first 50 customers get a $1,000 credit towards their account. That's right, $1,000 to help you get started protecting your wealth with real, physical gold. Don't wait for the next crisis. Go to O'KeefeMediaGold.com, that's OKEEFE MediaGold.com, or 833-324-GOLD. Again, that's O'KeefeMediaGold.com or 833-324-GOLD. Take action, get the facts, and protect your future, because freedom isn't given, it's secured. This is James O'Keefe. Don't just watch history, own a piece of it.
All right, we are back at the Price is My Life podcast with General Michael Flynn, talking about his upbringing, and now we're going to talk about Grenada for a minute. I was reading about the book. I was reading The Field of Flight, and you went to Grenada, your first combat operation. How many combat things have you done? Just sort of list them.
Over the years,
Yeah.
I would say in some type of capacity, close to 5 years, maybe over 5 years.
And just to give the audience some
So
context.
5 years of combat experience in my 33 years of military service.
Give the audience some context for what Grenada was about and why we went there.
Yeah, Grenada was essentially the takeover by Cuban elements, Cuban communists, of the island of Grenada, and there was U.S. students there. There was a university there, but it was this sort of the communist presence in Caribbean nations that the United States political leaders at the time did not want. Reagan was the president, and it was wherever they tried to pressure or place Cuban presence or communist presence on some of these islands. I think the Reagan administration was, we're not going to have that. So I was part of an effort. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division at the time, as a young officer, and the 82nd parts of it were deployed there. So
I read a quote in your book which resonated with me, because I do want to get to the mind control and to the fifth generation warfare, and obviously your whole life in 2017. We could spend an hour on any one of these items, but we have only an hour and a half left. And I just thought that was interesting, which is what you said, like the Soviets, I don't even know how to pronounce, Grenadian, is that correct? Grenadian.
Right. Grenadians.
The
yeah.
Grenadian communists were confident of their ultimate victory. They were confident of their ultimate victory. The laws of history guaranteed it, and they wanted to be sure that their part in the story was properly told. And I underline that because I felt that there's another book by Douglas Hyde called Dedication and Leadership, where it's almost like sometimes these communists are more devout than even Christians are. And I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Well, when you're devout to a non-deity, okay. So as a Christian, you're devout. Your devotion should be to God, and there's all the mysteries that go with that. But as a communist, your devotion is to like your government, your whatever that cause is, right? And they're zealots actually, and zealot is actually an old tribe, but it's so much different. It's so much different. It's hard for a lot of people to understand, and what's really hard, and as I describe it in that book, Field of Fight, it was about that time, and that was 1983. And here we are whatever that number is, 40 years later, 50 years later, 40 years later in 2025, and we have that same zealotry, that same devotion by elements inside of our own country, and very specifically inside of our own federal government for sure, and other aspects of our government. So this devotion to a cause that is not a devotion to the deity that I believe in, which is God Almighty, then it's something that's hard for people to understand. And I've had the ability and honor, really the privilege, I guess, if you say service to country. I had the privilege to be able to interview, participate in interrogations of some of these people, and try to understand where's your head at, right? Why is it that you believe so intensely in what your cause is? And it's hard for people to understand that.
What did you learn?
Well, I mean, when you think about somebody, I mean, I'm willing to give, and I was willing to give my life for my country, right? And for the person on my left or my right, or my family back home, for my freedoms, to protect our freedoms. These are people that are willing to give they will give up their life for something totally different. And you think about someone who puts on a suicide vest and will go blow up, or drive a car into a group of people, of children and women or shoppers, right? And you think that's unnatural, it's inhuman, it's evil. And I do think that we are now seeing it in our country. Then at that time, it began the rise of this insidiousness in 1983, and Reagan was the one, obviously, that said, in a speech, we're one generation away from losing all of our freedoms. He said it after that, but we're not one generation away anymore, folks, right? We're like one presidency away. We're one, we're one event away, possibly. So I think that where we are, where I learned there in, in that particular statement that you make is, and I have faced not just those types of communists on the battlefield, but also radicalized Islamists on the battlefield in other parts of the world.
Let's talk about. We got so much to get through.
Yeah.
Iraq and Afghanistan, you revolutionized intelligence gathering by insisting on real-time data sharing across military branches and team. My production team, I think we got some photos. This is from photos of Flynn in military uniform here on the big screen.
Yeah, my brother Charlie and I, yeah.
That's Charlie Flynn.
Yeah, Charlie just retired as a 4-star. That's in Afghanistan.
Afghanistan, this is what, 2001?
That's probably circa 2008, maybe. No, that'd be 2007 probably.
And JSOC.
Right.
Your JSOC career.
Right, Joint Special Operations Command. That's me and my brother Charlie in the operations center in Afghanistan, in Kabul. That's probably 2008 time frame, maybe 2007, right?
You were appointed director of the DIA, that's
right.
The intelligence agency, in 2012 by President Obama. How did that work? I'm just curious.
Well,
how does it work to be appointed to that?
Yeah, that's
Did President Obama reach out to you?
Yeah,
how does that work?
And that's good. That picture right there that you just showed, that's the one that was on the cover.
That back up on the screen,
cover of Rolling Stone. That was in
Stanley McChrystal.
Yeah, it was with.
That was the 2010 article written by Michael Hastings.
Right. So how do you get picked for some of these jobs? I actually got picked for 2 critical jobs and appointed by Barack Obama. How you get chosen for those, and the first one was Assistant Director of National Intelligence, and I served at the highest level there of the intelligence community. And then, of course, the next one was the Director of Defense Intelligence Agency, which is one of the largest intelligence agencies in the world. So how you get picked is, your performance, your network, the people that you worked for over the years. And I remember in August of 2010. So August of 2010, I got a phone call from none other than James Clapper. Okay.
That's the guy who lied under oath.
Totally. And a couple of times actually. Yeah, and he was a very, Clapper. I just can't. Today, anyway, we'll talk about him maybe. But in the August of 2010, I got a phone call, and he basically said, hey, we're going to bring you back to Washington, D.C., and we're going to put you at the up in the ODNI at that time. He was actually the director of national intelligence at that time, and he said that we're going to put you in a holding pattern, a holding job, which actually turned out to be a really good job, which was at the DNI level. And he goes, we're going to make you the next director of DIA after the current guy stepped down. And so I said, well, when's all that supposed to happen? This is literally a phone call, a secure phone call. He's calling me up. And I said, when's that going to happen? He goes, we're going to make it happen here in a couple of months. He goes, you got a couple more months out there. At that time, I was working for Dave Petraeus, General Petraeus. Stanley McChrystal, in that picture that we just saw, had just been relieved in the June time frame.
After that article came out.
After that article came out, I stayed on, and I stayed on with Dave Petraeus for about another 5 months or so. And then I went back to Washington, D.C. And what happens is there's a technical paperwork thing that goes through the system. You get nominated, you get appointed. The President of the United States has to stamp off on it. And then you go and have to get confirmed in front of the U.S. Senate, which I did twice, fully confirmed. So all these people, only a couple of years later that were calling me all kinds of names, they had sat there,
right,
saw my whole background, and confirmed me for 2 vital national security positions.
How did you clash with the administration over ISIS and Iran and Islam?
Yeah, so the first thing that really came about was I was part and put my name on an article that we wrote in Afghanistan, and it was a blueprint for fixing the problems in Afghanistan, and it got the CIA really upset at me, and Bob Gates was the Secretary of Defense at the time, and he told everybody in Washington, D.C., shut up, the paper's brilliant, we got a war to fight, this guy's out in Afghanistan doing what he needs to be doing, let's move out, let's move on. That was number one, and I didn't realize until later on how much the CIA was so pissed off at me about that. Then, as time went on, as I'm now in DIA, I started to clash with Jim Clapper and John Brennan, who was the director of the CIA at the time. I started to clash with them over the assessments for Afghanistan and then the assessments for Iran. And, the assessments for Afghanistan were really just, lie after lie after lie. Assessments on ISIS were lie after lie after lie. I was very public in a hearing in front of Congress where they were asked questions, they being Director Comey, Director Brennan, Director Clapper, and me, all asked about the rise of ISIS, and the talking point by the administration was ISIS, bin Laden's been killed, Al-Qaeda's on the run, and there's no problems here. And I sat there and said, no, actually it's pretty bad. And they're now in about 24 or 25 countries. So that was number 2. The third point was the Iran and the Iran nuclear weapons program that the Obama administration was promoting. And I was against it in uniform. I didn't come out publicly and say anything. I was very, chain of command guy. And I let it be known, and then I was let go. And
you were let go.
I was let go from DIA probably a year.
Because of this.
Because of the tension.
Behavior.
Because I wasn't going to buy their bullshit, right? And they're lying to the American people, and and they just wasn't going to do it. So I wasn't going to compromise myself.
My producer is asking me to ask this question from one of our audiences. Do you think that that Clapper is a traitor?
I think that Jim Clapper. Traitor. People need to look at the definition of it, but. Has he been a traitor to Mike Flynn? Speaking for myself, yes. Jim Clapper was an absolute traitor to me. Now, was he a traitor to the United States of America? I think it's sort of in the eye of the beholder. Did he participate in traitorous activities with Barack Obama and the whole Russiagate affair? Personally, I believe he did. When I saw him
Clapper's the guy who put his hand on his brow when he was asked about whether we spy on Americans.
Yeah, wittingly or unwittingly. Right.
And as a layman, you're an intelligence professional, but as a layman watching, I'm like, this is a pretty bad liar. That was one of the most egregious things I've ever seen.
Yeah, he knew what was going on. So a traitor during a time of war, it's like, and I'm not a legal person on it, so I'm going to caveat it, and I don't want to beat around the bush too much about it, but because it is a harsh word to use for somebody. I've been called a traitor 1,000 times. It is the one thing that I would tell, and I'd say to your audience, and I know that there's a lot of people watching. It's like, people have asked me about, well, don't you feel good about Comey being indicted? To me, James, it's absolutely heartbreaking that our country is in the place that it's in. It's heartbreaking because we, the people, have allowed it to get here. I mean, and again, sort of speaking for myself, do I want to have these guys who I knew I sat with many times? I ran a board with John Brennan, a counterintelligence board for 2 years with John Brennan. These people are snakes. They are subversives. They are.
What motivates them?
What motivates them is power and more of it, and what motivates them is an ability to control a direction that they want the United States to go. Now, is Jim Clapper part of that? He became part of it when he made the decision to stick with the Obama narrative, okay? And I can tell you, because I spoke to Jim Clapper in his office at the Director of National Intelligence level while I was the Director of DIA, and it was as the Obama administration was getting ready to go into its second term. I don't think I've ever told anybody this. That I said to Clapper, I said, he'd already had like 50 years in government service, right? Talk about a long-time bureaucrat. I said, why don't you just give it up? This is he and I having lunch in his office. And I said, why don't you just step down? You've had a great career. You've done all these wonderful things. And I said, don't you think it's time to step down? He says, well, the president's asked me to stay on. So Obama now, okay? Because he's getting ready to go into his second term. And to me, I said, well, that's your decision, obviously. And I said, maybe it's time though. And I'll just giving you my 2 cents. This is me talking to Clapper. And
where were you?
I was in his office. I was the director.
What building is that?
It's Liberty Crossing, out in just past CIA building out in that area. And I was sitting having lunch with him, having this conversation. I'm like, I really think that, and I looking back today, and I hope he's listening, and he should have taken my advice and stepped down then, because what happened is he got sucked into this vortex by Barack Obama and John Brennan and others who names like Susan Rice, Lisa Monaco, who just, I think Devin Nunes talked about Lisa Monaco the other day on one of the cable news networks. So that's a name that doesn't come up. Then you have others, right? Sally Yates, and there's a bunch of
and Obama. We have a little article. Nick pulled it up. Obama warned. Is it true that Obama warned the president about hiring you?
He did. Actually, right after the election. So, and unbeknownst to me until after he did it, because Trump and I talked about it, we joked about it actually after the conversation, after he flew back up to New York, Trump Tower. But yeah, Obama warned President Trump to not hire me. And you're talking about the turnover of the country from one president to the next duly elected president. And what does he do? He talks about two people, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, right?
But how did he warn the president?
He warned him. He basically said,
during the
meeting. During the meeting, he said, I'm going to let you, there's one
political article right there.
There's one person that you shouldn't hire, and that's Mike Flynn.
That's remarkable.
Right?
Who's the other person? Do we know?
Well, there was not another person to not hire, but there was another warning about being careful of the guy over in North Korea, right?
That says a lot that he would take time to talk about you.
And you know something? Put that picture up for everybody to see, right? I know you're showing
article.
Yeah, that one. That picture of Obama. That son of a bitch. I've never met him. Never had a conversation with him. Okay. I'm not sure I've ever said that. I talk about it in some of the books I've written. Definitely in Pardon of Innocence. That SOB put me into 2 critical jobs in the country. He appointed me. So there's nobody else can appoint in those jobs. He appointed me, fully confirmed by the United States Senate twice. And I was honest in my assessments instead of accepting the honesty for the assessments that I'm supposed to give as an intelligence professional. They wanted me to basically bow to their bullshit. And that SOB had the gall to tell the duly elected president of the United States who not to hire. He didn't mention anybody else. He didn't say, don't hire Steve Bannon, don't hire.
That's remarkable. They only brought you up.
Right.
It says in that article, quote, Obama and his staff felt Flynn, you were problematic and prone to what they thought were crazy ideas.
Yeah. Crazy ideas. How about that? Right?
So speaking of that, so you said intelligence is useful. Talking about your intelligence career here, and I think something that you've said, I don't know if you said it publicly, but I know that you've said this to me previously when I saw you years ago, is when you were in the Pentagon, you characterized these bureaucrats, and I thought this was very profound, and I'd like you to expound upon it for my audience. You said, James, they're like wall watchers. Yeah. And you'd walk down the Pentagon, and men, when they passed you, would look up at the ceiling or look away.
Look at the wall.
Can you just describe that phenomenon? What that's about?
Yeah, I was my first Pentagon job. Just to be a little context, it wasn't until I was a 2-star in the military. So I didn't serve in the Pentagon, and I served out in the field, served in divisions and corps, and in the field we call it in the military. So my first job in the Pentagon was as a 2-star. I was the head of intelligence inside the Pentagon, working for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So a significant job, and I'd come from the battlefield, right? So I'm walking down the hallway, and I'm one of these people, I'm a very extroverted guy, I guess, at times, but I'm one of these people that likes to engage people, right? And I'm walking down the hallway, and I'm watching these people as they're walking in the hallways of the Pentagon. Anybody that's been in the Pentagon, the hallways are very wide. You can drive you can like a 2-lane highway, right? And people would walk along the walls like this, So if somebody was coming up to them, especially a guy in uniform, a couple of stars on his shoulder, they kind of would look away from you, just like you were just doing. And they kind of look at the ceiling, and they just keep walking, right? I call them wall walkers or wall watchers, right? Because they were afraid if you engage them, they would actually have to do work. Like, they were afraid to be engaged. They did not want somebody
afraid to be engaged.
They did not want somebody like me, some general, walking in the hallways of the Pentagon to go, "Hey, what are you doing? What's your job? What's your role?" Because there's so many people, and that are in the Pentagon that are just useless. Okay, useless. And I know Secretary of War Hegseth now is really trying to work very hard to figure all that out, and it's not easy.
When you're a guy, to me, the way I interpret that, and I just think this is very interesting. It seems to me like you're a symbol of accountability. And when you walk down the hallway, you are accountability.
Yep, that's right.
But when you were in that context, did they report to you? Were these just random bureaucrats?
No, they didn't have. No, I would be in a hallway, and like they have different corridors: the Army corridor, the Marine Corps corridor, the SecDef's corridor, or the Sec War corridor. Now you got these different corridors. As I'm walking from one meeting to another, or I'm going to go into some big presentation, I would see these people, and I'd be like, "The hell do these people do?" And they would just they would not want to engage. And that always disturbed me, because I'm coming from an environment where, you're like interacting with people all the time. You generally know most of the people that are in your units and your organizations and in your formations. And I'm one of these type of people. It's like, "Hey, how you doing today? Is everything okay? You doing okay?" And I would see people that would be like sullen. They would be worried. They would be trying to hide what it was that they were doing. That's the way I felt. And I wrote about it. I wrote about it in there and described it. And I think that still exists today, because in the Pentagon there's a lot of people. You can go into a door, like and I used to do this in the Joint Staff area. I'd go, "What's behind that door?" Because there's doors everywhere, right? People that live in the Pentagon or work in the Pentagon know exactly what I'm talking about. And I'd go, "What's behind that door?" Right? There's no sign. So I'd say, "Can we open it up?" Because I'm in a position where at that time in an area, I had, some authority. And I'd go inside the door, and I'd be like, who's back here? There's people back there. And you're like, "What do you guys do?" "So what do you do?" And I'd be nice, I'd be very professional. Yeah. "Hey, how you doing? What's your name? And what do you do?" And they'd be like, "Well," and they'd be looking around going, "Oh my God, somebody actually came and saw me and found me."
Do you think that that's shame? What percentage of the people that you spoke to, it's shame or that they're hiding something? What is the thing?
Yeah, I don't think that they're hiding something other than the fact they don't want to lose their job, or they don't want to feel like, "Geez, maybe I could, my job could be taken away if I run into somebody and have to tell somebody that I actually don't do anything, number one, or number two, if I tell somebody that what I actually do, and they go, well, why do we do that anymore, right? I mean, there's so many things that we still do in government that we've been doing for more than one Secretary of War. Okay, there's places inside of the Pentagon, never mind State Department, the Intel community, Department of Justice, where we don't do those things anymore. The government doesn't even care about some of that stuff, but people still are going into a job every day. They get an 8-hour, they get an 8-hour salary for the day, and then they get their salary for the week, and they don't actually do anything for the country. And that's why I'm really interested in this government shutdown, to kind of see how does President Trump play this out, because I think the left made a huge mistake on the shutdown, and we're going to see some of the results of it.
And speaking of recent events, Comey was you saw the news with Jim Comey.
Mm-hmm.
He was not arrested the way that I was. And just kind of broadly, speaking of accountability, people are angry, and the audience, my audience, I know your audience is probably as angry as mine, but I'm an investigative reporter, so we expose evil and corruption every week. But increasingly, it's just no one's held accountable for anything in this country. People feel deeply about this.
Oh, I mean, I feel deeply about this. I mean, somebody sent me an X post last night that had like every single name from Russiagate, from all these, from J6. It was a long list of names. And basically the point was, under the Biden regime, these are the, Obama, Biden, or under the Democrats. I think it was under the Democrats. These were the people that were persecuted or prosecuted or jailed. And then it said under the Trump administration, it just had a big goose egg, right? So, all right, so let's put that aside. Comey, what they did to Roger Stone, okay? First of all, the effort to get Roger Stone, who had an expired passport, no criminal record,
just had him on the show,
unbelievable, right?
Crazy.
And but the effort, and it cost probably $1 to $1.5 million for the U.S. government to go do that, and they did it, and they also leaked it to. The likelihood that was Andrew Weissman that leaked it to CNN. So CNN's there on the spot, on the docket when they did the
CNN
SWAT.
Appeared. He took me through the story 2 hours. And while you're talking about this team, pull up the affidavit, please. The fully redacted affidavit of the FBI raid. So
so how does James Comey? Why is it that the conservatives? Why is it that this Department of Justice doesn't look at that? I mean, you don't have to tell CNN or tell Fox News, but you should treat people like they treated us. Okay.
But I think, General, what confuses my audience and people who are watching, and this isn't really directed at you. It's just a larger issue. Is that Trump is in charge, Bondi's in charge. People always say, and guys, can you pull up the one picture where it says probable cause justifies the FBI raid? Because this is very abstract, but we're going to make it less abstract for people. It's the other one. It's the first page, probable cause justifying the raid. If you look at the when I was raided by the FBI, they released the affidavit, and every single, pull up on the screen, guys, every single line of this affidavit has been redacted, and I showed that to you.
Yeah.
What is going on? I
mean, first of all, accountability. We must have accountability. The people that committed treason, as Tulsi Gabbard said, as President Trump has said, and they've laid out the names. We've talked about some of them, Obama on down. There's going to have to be accountability. I don't know legally how they're going to go through that gymnastics event. But
what does accountability look like? Accountability
looks like people that get indicted, go in front of a jury of their peers, let our justice system play out. More than likely, given some of the things that we now know about, but these are people that should go to prison.
Hold on, team. Can we put that on the screen so the live audience can see what I'm seeing on the bigs? There we go. Okay.
Yeah.
So, quote: probable cause justifying search of O'Keefe's person and premises. This is a joke. This is a disgrace.
Yeah, so they gave this back to you, I think, for context for the audience. So this is, you asked for this information, and they
dropped the case against me.
Right.
When I was
But you
raided.
see that. I mean, so go back to that if you don't mind, just for the audience. I mean, this is like laughing in our face.
But this
right?
is a newsroom. This is
Right.
a journalist. I mean,
Right.
there isn't even a colorable crime. And I guess the question it's a conversation we can have, but if they can't even be transparent about why the Federal Bureau of Investigation raided Project
Right.
Veritas, my reporters, which by
Right.
the way is so unprecedented. If they did it in Ukraine or
Right.
or some other country, our State Department would issue sanctions. If they can't be transparent about that, how?
Well, so here's the issue with that, because this is what I think I said to you when we were talking prior to coming on today. So why aren't they talking about that, or why did they redact that like that? Because in there they'll go, well, we're gonna divulge our sources and our methods, which is total bullshit. Okay, that is the big lie that the intelligence community and the people in the national security. I mean, I was the national security advisor. I was head of one of the largest intelligence agencies in the world. Intelligence has been my forte in business for my adult life. And sources and methods, I understand. But what we have learned from our illustrious federal law enforcement organization, and that includes the Department of Justice, but certainly the FBI, is that kind of stuff right there that you just saw, that you just showed to your audience, that could just be all a bunch of made-up bullshit.
Tell me about that.
Just total lies.
How does that work?
Where it's a couple of agents sitting in a room, right, with a prosecutor, and they say, we got to get this guy. We're going to get this guy. So let's come up with some sources. Maybe a source is the New York Times. Maybe a source is the Washington Post or some other, the Daily whatever, right? I mean, they will take a source and they'll go, well, multiple sources said. Those multiple sources could be their buddies in the media that said, oh, I heard this, I heard that. Those aren't sources. Those aren't vetted, what we would call bulletproof A1 sources, okay? For people that understand the world of intelligence, an A1 source is a bulletproof source. That means somebody who has given you a lot of good intelligence, a lot of good information in the past, and it's been vetted, and it's been used and applied and worked. These guys are making stuff up. So I'll bet you, underneath all that black redacted information is literally a bunch of lies that they're making up about you, and that's why they don't want to see it.
Why isn't it? Why is it redacted? Why
it's redacted because they don't want you to see it. Because
this is not the top person. This is the mid-level.
Yeah.
Administrative state.
Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, we'll see. We'll see how high up that goes. To be able to do that, because to get the permission to redact at that level is not some low-level clerk. Okay, that is somebody at a serious.
In my case, I was a very unusual case because we had liberals defending me, the ACLU defended me,
Right.
the Reporters Committee defended me. I think the left defended me because they didn't want Trump to do it to them, and Trump hasn't done it to them. I'd be the first person to speak up.
Right.
But I think it kind of speaks to, I think the sources and methods thing is fascinating because you are intelligence. And I agree with you. I think that it's sources and methods. For example, if Ashley Biden, this is over the diary, the Biden's daughter's diary that someone sent to me. If Ashley Biden lied to the FBI, or if there was someone there they had trying to protect.
Right.
And I did speak to a source inside the White House who told me that there were probably confidential informants at my organization, or moles, or what have you. But it seems like this is something that's preventing people from getting the truth, is this idea of intelligence across the spectrum, sources
we don't
and
need
methods.
we don't need to know, that it's that let's say the source was Mike Flynn. We don't need to know it's Mike Flynn, but just could be like they've done in a lot of other redacted or other Freedom of Information Act releases, where they redact the names of a particular person. They'll go source X or somebody Y, right? I mean, we don't need to know that. But what we want to know, we don't need to know that. The American people don't need to know that, because it doesn't matter unless that source lied, like in the case of a source for the FBI in Russiagate by the name of Halper. He lied and he got away with it, and they redacted his name throughout until recently when Tulsi Gabbard and Cash have released more files, and now we know it's this guy, I call him the Walrus, Halper. And so we don't need to know that. But the other information, because what they're doing is they're going after an investigative journalist, right? This is dangerous. So this isn't
scary.
It's not just going after Mike Flynn, who said something off the wall. It's going after a journalist, like you've seen this around the world. I mean, Tommy Robinson's another one. Assange, another one. I mean, These are dangerous times when they start to go after journalists for what the journalist is trying to expose. That's what you're trying to expose. And all you're trying to do is expose the truth. And you lay it out there, it's true. And what they do is they attack you, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to shut you down. They want to shut you up. And that is called, and I talk about this in the book, Pardon of Innocence, I talk about it in my movie, and that's called assassination by narrative, okay? The narrative assassination. Now, will they go further? Will they go to physical assassination? And the answer is absolutely.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break, and next we're going to talk about fifth generation warfare, which is absolutely fascinating. Psychological warfare and what you just talked about. Assassinations, literally, figuratively, metaphorically. So we'll be back in a couple minutes with General Michael Flynn, and then we'll get to your questions after another 45 minutes.
We're standing up to the powers that tried to discredit us, silence us, smear us, raid us, and throw us in jail. They've awakened a sleeping giant. We're building a movement of transparency and accountability in both the public and private sectors, because we run from nothing, we hide from nothing. And when you join and get your full access pass, you fuel a movement for truth. We are the media now.
This is James O'Keefe. You know me for exposing the truth and holding the powerful accountable. But today, I want to talk to you about protecting your own freedom, starting with your finances. Right now, the warning signs are everywhere. The Fed continues to print money, interest rates and inflation remain high, and everywhere you look, your hard-earned money just doesn't go as far as it used to. That's not your imagination, it's today's reality. If central banks are loading up on gold, why not you? That's why I've now partnered with American Independence Gold. They're veteran-owned, and proceeds from every sale go to Tunnel to Towers, supporting our first responders and heroes. And listen, right now, the first 50 customers get a $1,000 credit towards their account. That's right, $1,000 to help you get started protecting your wealth with real, physical gold. Don't wait for the next crisis. Go to O'KeefeMediaGold.com, that's OKEEFE MediaGold.com, or 833-324-GOLD. Again, that's O'KeefeMediaGold.com or 833-324-GOLD. Take action, get the facts, and protect your future, because freedom isn't given, it's secured. This is James O'Keefe. Don't just watch history, own a piece of it. right, everyone, we're back with General Flynn on the Price is My Life podcast. So much to talk about. And now we're going to talk about 5GW. That's not the Verizon phone thing. That's not the LTE. That's fifth generation warfare. And I read this book. It's very dark. And I'm just going to kind of take my audience who haven't read this book through a few things that are in this book. Psychological operations, PSYOP. Psychological operations are operations designed to convey selective information and indicators to audiences to influence their motives, objective reasoning. Right now, someone somewhere is assessing you as a target and figuring out how to influence your thoughts, behaviors, and actions. There's even a quote you have from Chapter 2 from JFK, President John F. Kennedy. Listen to this. This is John F. Kennedy talking about the big game and few of the players that we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means, conscripted vast human and material resources. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned. No rumor is printed. No secret is revealed. This fifth generation warfare stuff about how our fear is justified, that a single shadow government is secretly utilizing the aspects of irregular warfare against us. Shadowy governments using tactics and strategies. Some call it the administrative state. Some call it the deep state. I know that it's real because they've targeted me. They've targeted you. And I guess there's so much to get into. And I want to get into this and get into some of your notes. But just to start, it seems like the enemy is within.
Right.
Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, and I refer to this enemy inside. You know, we call it the deep state. That lets everybody kind of understand, what we're talking about. But I actually, you'll hear me talk about this more and more, and I probably will write about it. I call it the axis of resistance. The axis of resistance. And inside of our government, there are elements that are both domestic and foreign inside of our government. Okay. The unholy alliance that I have always talked about, this unholy alliance, and I wrote about it actually in Field of Fight, because the subtitle of that is How to Win the War Against Radical Islam and Its Allies. So this unholy alliance is like China, Russia, Venezuela, North Korea, Iran, and this radicalization of an ideology. That's the sort of external. But internal is this axis of resistance, this deep state. And they have elements that participate with them, like the media. Media is a big, big component of it, and has the fake news, if you want to call it, put a moniker on it. The use of covert operations. Okay, so the intelligence community of the United States of America, principally the CIA, has gotten involved in domestic activities when they should not get involved in domestic activities, and they partner with, as we have seen in Russiagate and the outcome of Russiagate, with elements like the FBI and other elements, but corporate world to a degree. When you think about the DEI issues that we deal with, LGBTQ, because I know one of the things I did want to try to jump to, but fifth generation warfare is the war that we are involved in, and so for people to understand, when I say war or warfare, those are two different things, right? The war that you're in, Ukraine and Russia, right? That's a war. But warfare and understanding the nature of warfare and understanding that you're not fighting the last war, right? Generals typically fight the last war. So you have to understand this dimension that we are in. And fifth generation warfare is a combination of elements of hybrid warfare, irregular warfare, the physical components of it. Clearly and physically, you can be deceived and you think that you believe something that's totally not true, but you're going to believe it.
But just to be clear for your audience, the first generation warfare was pre-gunpowder.
Right.
Second generation, gunpowder.
Right.
Third generation, flying machines, rockets. Fourth generation, nuclear. And now we're talking about this new
And now we're talking about,
age.
so like fifth generation warfare is, if you look at a spreadsheet and you got first generation warfare, you only have these things. Second, you have a few more things. Third, you got a few more things. Fourth, well, in fifth generation warfare, you have all of it, right? And all of it is, and then added to that are things like deception, covert operations, propaganda, information operations. Cyber is another component. Space operations, lasers. I mean, there's all these different things. The whole thing with weather control. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. So let's look at all of these different aspects that a government, particularly a government like the United States government, can do to manipulate what we believe. And so when we think about fifth generation warfare, what you would want our country and our government to do is to apply it to them, right? To apply it to the bad guys,
Correct.
to apply it to our adversaries over there. When in fact, what they've been doing is they've been applying it right here at home, and they've been doing it for a long time.
Is that legal?
No, it's not, of course it's not legal. It's not legal at all. But does it happen? Absolutely, it happens. And so, it's not. People have to realize that this is not just because Donald Trump came on the scene. One of the things that President Trump has clearly exposed because of the sort of the demonic hatred that they have of him, because he's a guy that comes into the political fray and he's paying for it himself. You know, I can tell you going through the 2016 campaign and the amount, he was paying for the thing himself, and so he wasn't bought and paid for. I got all kinds of great stories about that, but so Trump shows up, and it's like, wait a second, this is a guy we don't control. This is a guy that is not part of the establishment, the uniparty, all these, the rhinos, the GOP, whatever you want to call Washington, D.C., right? This group of people that run our country. And is there somebody above them? Absolutely, there's somebody above them. There's another element, and they find themselves, they call themselves, and this is why, I wrote a bunch of notes down about this color revolution that we are involved in. So we are in the midst of a color revolution in this country, and and people have asked me, what's the color? The color is lavender or purple. Okay,
Lavender or purple.
Lavender or purple. So I use that because in other color revolutions there was actually a actual color or a name given to the actual revolution that took place, right? And because those colors are colors of the LGBTQ movement. Okay, so the LGBTQ movement is a form and function of fifth generation warfare. So when you add Black Lives Matter or Antifa, right? Because we've known about Black Lives Matter and Antifa for a while. Actually, Antifa's been around for a long time, decades. So you throw these things out there, like they're out there in Portland right now. They're up in Chicago. They're up in New York City. They're in this country. So you put these things out there, and they're freedom of speech. They're protesters. They're not doing anything wrong. They're burning the cities. They're trying to they're beating up cops, right? They're beating up federal police officers. So there's a physical component of fifth generation warfare, but then there's also a psychological component of it. If you turn on any of the major networks, or the major networks being ABC, CBS, and NBC, or the cable news networks, to include one that tends to be conservative, they're not going to. They'll talk about these things as though they're like, well, these are just people out there protesting. No, I mean, I listened to a portion of some of the interaction between the Senate Judiciary Committee and Attorney General Pam Bondi early this morning when she was at her hearing. And it's like, I'm thinking to myself, where do these people come from? And the guy I'm thinking about was Durbin, who's a senator from Illinois. And I'm thinking, okay, you've got over 500 people in the city of Chicago that have been murdered this past year, and you're gonna complain that President Trump has a responsibility to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and has a overall responsibility to provide the safety and security of the American people. And he's looking at it and he's going, oh my God, we can't have this murder rate that's going on right now. I mean, so fifth generation warfare. I'm going to keep going back to that because there's components that are physical, James, but then the majority of those components are in the world of gray. Okay.
What does that mean?
And in this world of gray, being deception, being media manipulation, being covert operations, being running an operation like Russiagate that was based on a complete fabricated story and running it for years.
And it takes a decade later. It's like
Right.
I've experienced this in my life that years later the truth comes out, and then we've all kind of moved on, and
Right.
it's a long time. So it goes back to the accountability question. But I guess I keep going back to this, and it's very dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's that the enemy. It says, against your enemies, foreign and domestic. The enemy is within. The enemy is within our own government.
Right.
Correct?
Absolutely, within our own government. The infiltration of a socialist, communist element, as well as a radicalized Islamist element, like it or not, and people are going to go, they're going to lose their minds, and they're going to call me all kinds of names, and that's fine.
I think people are
but
waking
it's
up
real.
to this.
Oh, they're definitely waking up to
maybe
it.
15 years ago they would have called you names, but I'm not
One-
so sure.
One of
right
the
now.
things, I just use the example because it's a real example, and it happened not too long ago, a couple of years back, where during the era of COVID, there was a biology professor at Harvard who was arrested. I think he was arrested by the FBI because he got caught dead to rights working for the Chinese Communist Party. And he was getting like $40,000 a month or something like that. He was on their payroll, and he was a Harvard professor of biology during the era of COVID. So COVID was a psychological operation, but it also had very physical components to it, right? The jab. So these are elements that are not spontaneous. So a color revolution, and this is the one thing I think is also people lose sight of, and I've had this argument or debate with people that just because I'm an information fanatic. Intelligence is my business, so I pay attention. I read a lot. I analyze things. I make I try to use good discernment, but it's hard for most people to understand that we're going through a like Anson calls it a sort of revolution and a counter with a counter in the midst of this color revolution. And there is globally, there's a multipolar component and a unipolar component. The unipolar component are the globalists. They want this new one world order, right? The multipolar component are those countries that want to protect their own sovereignty and their own nationalism, like the United States of America. I think that's what Trump wants to do. People like Viktor Orban, people like Milei in Argentina. So then you take it down into the United States. You take it right down into our country and inside of our own system of government. So they took over the education system in our country. It started with when Jimmy Carter created the Department of Education. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask you about this fear is justified section, because it says there are many governments and equally as many shadowy governments leveraging numerous useful idiots. That's a term everyone always uses,
right.
Useful idiots, and using the conditions of the environment to shape perspectives to achieve objectives. And we're gonna talk about the color revolution in a minute, because I want to ask you about
every Palestinian
LGBT.
protester that comes out of Columbia University with their SAT scores that are probably 1,600 are useful idiots.
Let me challenge you a little bit, because I agree with you. I agree with that. But let me challenge you a little bit and expand that a little bit.
Okay.
Which is the American people are very afraid. I mean, you're I hope you don't mind me saying that you're standard deviations away from the average here. People like you, and there are others out there, you're willing to speak up. You're willing to be a force of accountability in the Pentagon. You're willing to do the things that you jump off of a bridge into the Rhode Island Ocean. Most people aren't that way, and they're scared. They're terrified.
They're frightened.
Many of them are apathetic, which perhaps apathy is even worse than fear. Yeah. But what I'm trying to do is get to a solution, and we're trying to wake people up. The Charlie Kirk assassination happened 3 weeks ago. Maybe that's waking people up for a minute, but it seems like it's this irregular warfare is being used on good people who are terrified.
It's being used, James, on grassroots organizations. It's being used on churches. I mean, look at what just broke here in the last 72, 96 hours with the geofencing of churches, right? And I got a hold of a good friend of mine when that story broke, and I looked at some of the churches, and I posted some of this on my X site. But I got a hold of a good friend of mine who, a Catholic guy, great, runs a great organization. And I said, what has happened to Catholic churches in the last 4 or 5 years? And he gave me this staggering number of, I think it was 507 Catholic churches in the United States of America since 2021 have had some type of serious damage or burned, right? And I'm thinking, because you think the Jewish synagogues are going to be the ones that are going to be targeted, and they are. But there's this assault on Christianity. The bigger issue is assault on Christianity. So I want people to understand that fear is a condition that we all live with. I live with it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm going to be fearless about something. I say we should be fearless about it, but we all have fear as a psyche in our human behavior, and I understand it. I've been on battlefields, so I understand when I have that emotion and how to adjust and how to try to work through it or to drive myself through it. Most people, and most people being like maybe 90% of the American people, have a really difficult time, and they don't want to have their names in the headlines. They don't want to be, they don't want to have the FBI knock on their door. They don't want to have bad things happen to their families. But what I'm here saying to you today, that if we don't have more Americans, and this is the solution, and I use this phrase, local action equals a national impact. What does that mean? That means that all of us have a responsibility to serve as citizens, period. So people come up to me all the time and they say, thank you for your service. My father served, my uncle served, my grandfather served, I never served, that kind of thing. And I'm humbled by that. I deeply, deeply appreciate when people tell me that. And I'm honored by the service that I had in uniform and the service that I still feel like I'm giving. But what I try to do, James, is I try to turn the conversation around to them and say, so how do you serve today? And I always used to teach about control, which I talk about in the Fifth Generation Warfare book. Control is something that you have to consider wherever you're at, right? Like as a leader, there's only certain things that I can control. I can't, sitting here today and doing the things that I do, I can't control what President Trump is going to tweet out at whatever time of day or what he's going to say, when it comes to the situation in the Middle East, Venezuela, right here at home, Portland. I can't control that. But I can control what I do. And I think for everybody listening, if you take away one thing from today's conversation, you must take away the question about how do you serve today? How are you serving your community, your family? And then if you're doing that, then you're serving our country and you're doing exactly what our founders wanted, which is it is a citizen republic. But it's only a republic, not if we can keep it. It's only a republic if we actually do serve, right? I was on a thing, and I'll get off my soapbox on this one. I was on a phone call last night with a political issue up in Tennessee, and a gentleman came on the line and said, and asked, great question. He says, well, these people, we got to have term limits. We got to have term limits. Well, then don't keep voting for somebody who doesn't want term limits, right? Make sure that if you're going to vote for somebody that you ask them the question and they say, yes, I'm for term limits, then go work for them and get them into office instead of allowing these people to sit in there for 30 or 40 or 50 years and just berate us, corrupt us. And I can tell you, I'm involved in multiple cases right now in federal court, okay? So this is a little hidden secret. And I'll shut up here for a second. I'm involved in multiple whistleblower cases in federal court. And the amount of corruption that we are exposing in these cases is staggering. And it's related to USAID. It's related to the U.S. Postal Service. It's related to Ukraine. It's related to the Jack Smith investigation. They're all filed in federal court. People can go look them up.
Well, let me go back to what I thought was the most astute thing you said, which is that, and I'm paraphrasing in my own words, is the focus on the things that the individual citizen can control.
Right.
Because citizens do that to me all the time. They're like, what are we going to do about all these other apathetic people out there? Or you hear this all the time is, why isn't the mainstream media covering? It's like, well, you can't control whether the New York Times talks about what General Flynn is talking about.
Exactly.
But what you can do is control what you do. That's what I'm taking from what you're saying. In other words, the citizen, the patriotic citizen, from my perspective, has to tell the truth. Right. It's very hard to tell the truth. It's very hard to speak up.
Yep.
And let me make this less abstract. Like even the JFK assassination, the people that saw things, but they were threatened, they were scared. So it's very hard for good people, if you're witness to something, whether it's on a level of that event or whether it's in Rhode Island in a local community center.
Right.
It's very hard for humans and to be brave and to actually tell the truth and to speak their conscience. So how do you get the individual patriot to do that? How do you persuade them to do that?
Yeah, I think that at this stage, where we are as a nation, one, they have to know what to do. So locally, we have to find local leaders that are willing to step up, speak out at their local levels. And we briefly talked about earlier maybe the Reawaken America tour. We went around the country and we were doing that. That's generally what I do when I go out and about, is I'm trying to get people to understand. I'm gonna come in. Mike Flynn's gonna come in. I'm gonna pop in. I'm gonna pop off. And I'm gonna pop out. So you got to find somebody in your community. And as I look around at an audience, I'm like, which one of you will be the one that will step up and take a leadership role in your community, and then charge, right? Like, let's charge together. Let's like a football team says ready, break, and you get to the line and you assault. You conduct a play, right? Do something. I mean, I do think that there could come a time, and we've used the word frightening or frightened. I do think that people are in fact frightened, and there is some of that today, and that's again, it's heartbreaking, because look at what we're about to have. We're about to have a longtime director of the FBI, is going to be he's been indicted. I mean, he's going to go. We're going to learn more about these things. I mean, it is for the United States of America to be in the place that we're in. We cannot kid ourselves. We cannot kid ourselves. We're here. So now what is it that we do about it? I know, because I'm watching a special election today very closely. I mean, if it was a general election, if everybody could come out and vote that was actually registered to vote in this particular election for one district in the House of Representatives, you'd have over 1 million people that could vote, both sides, right? Mainly Democrats and Republicans. You could have over 1 million people. There's probably going to be, my guess, 40 to 50,000 that will show up to vote. That's for a member of Congress. And so, I don't know how else to tell you or to tell the American people how important it is to vote and exercise your vote, and then to challenge those who want to have our vote. To get my vote should be a privilege. It shouldn't just be some rote exercise, some rote drill that we go through and I just go check a box and we keep putting in these corrupt individuals, because the majority of people in Congress, they're corrupt. Sorry, they're corrupt. There's very few of them that aren't compromised.
But it takes two different types of courage to fight a war. The von Clausewitz, the physical courage, which is what you're familiar with and you have done, and people that you know have done, and then the moral courage. Someone inside the FBI who was against you or against me, to have the stones to speak up. I mean, that takes their life may be destroyed.
It will be destroyed. More than likely, it will be destroyed.
It will be destroyed.
Yep.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, is that what people in this country need to start doing, just speaking up and having their lives destroyed as a result?
Yeah. Now, I will tell you that since Trump won, the number of whistleblowers has risen. So that's a very positive sign. So we do have people that are inside of the system that have spoken out. There are others that are still inside the system that don't want to, because what they're watching, and this message is really to somebody like General Bondi, Attorney General Bondi, or Kash Patel, or to the President of the United States if he's listening, right? Or if he listens to this clip. People won't speak out if they don't see people being held accountable for the crimes that they committed. There cannot be two systems of justice. There can only be one system of justice. And I understand that we're trying to follow the rule of law, which is fine, and I'm for that. But we have to have an equal system of justice. There cannot be, because you're from an elite social class of people, you're going to get away with something. I mean, there's just, and people are upset about that.
I'm very aware. I mean, we work with 9 whistleblowers here at Citizen Journalism Foundation, and half of them have lost their jobs and pensions. Right. And it's tough because of the dynamic. It's not Trump. It's not the head of FEMA. It's the mid-level managers whose ego gets bruised because the truth teller or the nurse witnesses some fraud, and their boss fires them. But what are we up against in terms of this 5GW, fifth generation warfare? What are we up against in terms of brainwashing and psychological operations designed to mess with the minds of good people.
Yeah. So don't. I want everybody to understand this and be very clear here that this is very real. This color revolution idea is not spontaneous. It's very well thought through. They have a doctrine or a manifesto, and there's different examples of that. They have it, and these have been in play for decades now, and certainly updated as they've gone along. So this mind manipulation, this.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
How does it work? You're an intelligence professional. How do they do it?
What they do is they can target individuals. So we talked earlier about trying to understand my weaknesses, and my weaknesses were my family and a specific component of my family. So
and who's they? Who are we talking
they
about?
They being in this case for me that was elements of the intelligence community, okay, within the CIA and the FBI that work on things like covert influence and covert action and covert operations. I mean, those are two things, CI and CA, covert influence, covert action. They're very, very good at this kind of stuff. So that's to just go after an individual. Then you take it up a notch to groups of people, right? And you can break out the demographics of different groups of people, blacks, whites, Jews, Catholics, Irish, it doesn't matter. And then you can also look at other types of groups like churches. And within the church community, within the Christian community, as an example, you have evangelicals, you have different components of like Protestants, Episcopalians, Methodists. So there is an effort to drive wedges in between the Christian community and, of course, Catholics. Right?
Our own government?
This is being done by elements within the government and working outside of it to try to get this idea, particularly on Christianity, to try to drive this idea that our nation isn't based on Christian values and principles.
So let's take the color revolution, the color purple or lavender, the preferred color of the LGBT community. This is something that you've talked about. Is that community being leveraged by forces within our own government, from your view?
Yeah, absolutely.
How so?
Absolutely, and not just from inside, but this is this axis of resistance. So you have a subversive communist element, Marxist element, if you will, inside of our government. And I just use some of my notes here. I mean, I'll give you the examples of their manifesto. Norm Eisen, just to name an individual, wrote something called the Democracy Playbook. People can go look it up, the Democracy Playbook. Norm Eisen was in the Obama administration first term, he was basically the White House head of ethics. He was the ethics advisor to Barack Obama during the first administration. Norm Eisen has played a big role, and there's elements that he's tied into. Another one is called the Transition Integrity Project that was in 2020. Again, these are the playbooks, right? The doctrine. You have to have doctrine. The military, 5GW, that book right there is doctrine and in fact it's written in a way to be a doctrine for how we need to be thinking about it's the Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. And then you have these methods, and I wrote down a few here, like covert operations, spying on political campaigns, for example, right? I'm not making this up. This is not a conspiracy theory.
That came out this week.
Oh my God! Come on, spying on not just the senators, but spying on the Trump transition, the Trump campaign. I mean, while he was the president of the United States. And who's it being done by? It's being done by elements of our own government, right?
It seems like it's partisan, and that's usually Democrats against Republicans. Why is that?
Yeah, because the Democrat, so for your audience, I am a former Democrat, right? I grew up as a Democrat. I grew up in a family of Democrats, JFK Democrats. My mother was the head of the Democrat Party in our local area. I mean, but she was also the head of pro-life, right? And this was in the 60s and early 70s. And then, of course, we started to see, and then for me going in the military, I never really participated in politics because I saw myself having to play a different role. Like I never voted for president of the United States because they were my commander in chief. I don't want to say, well, I didn't vote for him. No, I worked for him. He was my commander, right? That's the Constitution. So we're facing a time where this is not about Democrat versus Republican, left versus right. This is actually a new direction that these people And these people are globalists, right? They are in our government. Obama is clearly one of them. There's other elements, all these other names that we've heard. Certainly people that are part of the globalist crowd, the World Economic Forum, the George Soroses of the world. Bill Gates made me sick to my stomach to see President Trump have Bill Gates sitting at the for lunch at the White House. I mean,
was there as well.
Zuckerberg. I mean, these people would have they would have been happy had Trump gone to prison. But
are those people like around Trump recommending that those people get in there? You think?
I think that there's definitely elements that are within the White House structure and definitely in the national security state that do that. I mean, I am the biggest champion for President Donald J. Trump. I've stood up for him and
why aren't you in the administration?
Well, I think that there's some blocking of that. I do believe that. I'm on one of these. I'm on the West Point Board of Visitors, which is I talked to the president about, and he and I have a great relationship. I think at this stage, I kind of like the role where I'm at because I feel like I can be much more of a voice. If I were in the administration, I don't think people would know where I stood because when you're inside, you have to stick with what the president, his policy and the narratives that they want to get out to the American people. I mean, I think most of them I'm aligned with. I think Stephen Miller is terrific.
I think if you were, for example, if you were just magically appointed as the director of the FBI, I wonder whether you could succeed. I wonder whether General Flynn could be successful as a director of one of these agencies when it seems from the audience's perspective and from my perspective as a journalist that these institutions are systemically corrupt.
Yeah, they are systemically corrupt.
So how do you succeed?
So here's the difference. So not only a lifetime of experience, but when you are in leadership roles in bigger and bigger organizations. So I've led an organization that's 20,000 people. I've led an organization that's 7,000 people. I've led an organization that's 1,500 people. In a series of assignments, and a couple of those organizations were bureaucracies, right? And I've reformed one, and the reforms of one have stuck till to this day.
Which one is
so
that?
That's the DIA. So what I would tell people is that. I love these people that the president has appointed, and I am trying to help them in my own ways, publicly and privately. But when you are thrust into a job, and your experience has been not running large bureaucracies, maybe it's been running an office, right? An office of lawyers, maybe a prosecutor's office, which is like maybe, could be 10, could be 12, could be 20 people. It doesn't mean that you don't have the leadership skills. It just means that you don't have the experience. And it's not like becoming a CEO. So all these people that are running companies out there going, I've done that. This is not a company, okay? You're running a government apparatus and a government structure, which is totally different. And it's run by a different set of rules, policies, and law and regulation. So those are the things that I understand. That's why, to a degree, I can tell you there's members of the GOP that don't want me anywhere near this White House.
So as a director of a large, I don't know how many people the FBI, was it 100,000? I don't know offhand how many people work there, but what are the sorts of things that one has to do in running a large bureaucracy to reform the systemic rot, in your view? Yeah,
I think immediately you have to remove the outer layer. Okay, so for the outer layer, the outer layer is like in the FBI and the DOJ. I think the DOJ has like 93 U.S. attorneys around the country. Okay, and so there's an FBI SAC or ADIC, I think is what they call them. So a special agent in charge of this Pittsburgh field office, an assistant director in charge of Chicago, an assistant director in charge of Miami, Los Angeles, New York, Atlanta. So the ADICs are actually, they're deputy directors of the FBI. They're significant players. So you're talking about, let's just say 90 offices around the country, right? Mm-hmm. When you come into that office, especially now, it's not like 30 or 40 years ago when you came in and everybody was still pro-America, right? You come into an organization like Kash Patel, You got all those people that are in those jobs. They were hired by the previous team.
Right.
Remove them. Thank them for their service. Like, reach your hand out.
What percentage do you think it is of personnel, approximately?
I'm going to guess a little bit, and I'm going to lowball it. It's at least 50%.
That's a lot of turnover.
Yeah, but you know something? There's people out there that are not so bad, right? So now, do you take 6 months, a year, 2 years? Now the FBI director's going to be in there 10 years, let's say, right? Last 2 haven't made it, but let's say he does. Is it in 10 years you're going to reform it? Yeah, you could do that if you knew you were going to be there for that long. But if we go back to a leftist government in the United States of America, we are never going to come back to being a constitutional republic. That's the one big message that I want to leave, as well as figuring out how you're going to serve this country.
So we have the color revolution, the purple or lavender preferred color of the LGBT, the doctrine, the manifesto, the methods, covert operations, funding operations, messaging campaigns, and all of this stuff, asymmetrical. What type of warfare is this called in your 5G warfare? What is it, psyops or?
Yeah, well, psyops is a subset of it. I mean, it's all under the rubric or the umbrella of 5th generation warfare. Mm-hmm. So what we wanted to do in that particular book is we wanted to write a document that actually was a guide, so the American people, whoever wants to read it, can not only read it, but we also put in there exams at the end of every chapter, which it's the first time I've ever seen a bestseller that has exams at the end of every chapter.
It's good
so
because
people
it helps
can
your
train.
comprehension, because you want to go back and look.
Right.
I mean, listen. I think I understand what you're saying, and I feel it deeply because I lived it. When the FBI raided my home,
right,
I was in a state of fear, and I think it's hard for people to accept this.
Yeah.
Because how do you reconcile love of country to I can't believe my own government is doing this. It's evil.
So for me,
let me just say one more thing.
Yeah,
I went to dinner, and I won't mention who, but someone who's prominent, and they put it this way. And I'm not asking you to agree with this, and I don't know if I agree with this, but they actually said, "I'm ashamed of my own government. I'm ashamed of my own country, and I just don't know how to reconcile being a patriot with realizing that everything appears to be a lie." Everything, from JFK to
the moon
I'll ask
landing.
you about Charlie Kirk
everything.
in a moment. But
oh my God,
how do you reconcile that?
Yeah. Well, so again, I'll speak for myself in this account. So they went through my entire life, okay, and then they decided they were going to charge me for not doing anything wrong. When they went through my entire life, and I know this because we were able to get the results of Crossfire Razor. Right? So, and they couldn't find an unpaid parking ticket. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a Boy Scout. I am not. But I'm one of these guys that tries to live a good life, right? And tries to live a life that is respectful of, like my father taught me, the golden rule: treat others like you like to be treated, right? Mm-hmm. And so they couldn't find an unpaid parking ticket. Yet our own government, the United States government, and the elements inside of our government, the intelligence community, the highest law enforcement organization in the United States of America, came after me to get Trump. They took me out, and I mean, if people want to go read one of the documents, it's by a guy by the name of an FBI agent, senior FBI agent by the name of Barnett, and I think it was September or October of 2020 when his 302 report became public, and basically in it he says, yeah, the whole thing about Flynn was get Flynn so we could get Trump, and it was used in other language.
Trying to flip you against the president.
So that's why Obama said what he said. I mean, and that was when he said that. That was all before I started talking to everybody in the world, because I was getting ready to go into the job as National Security Advisor. So they didn't. It's not just people come up to me all the time and go, "Oh, I'm so sorry what they did to you." It's what they did to this country, James.
Yeah.
They did this to this country, and they're still doing it. They are not going to give up. I want people to understand that These people are not going to roll over because Donald Trump won the White House, or he says he signs an executive order to fix our elections. I mean,
I think that's even more confusing for people when Donald Trump is in the White House and nobody has been arrested. That doesn't make sense to people.
Right.
Let's go to the Charlie Kirk assassination, and I'm reading books on the JFK assassination, and it's a very dark area. What is your perspective on? Was it a lone tranny with the furry girlfriend? Was it just a crazy person? What do you make of all of it?
I think that it still remains to be seen exactly what happened. There's too many questions about his assassination. There's been so many theories out there. I mean, so I personally, I don't believe that it was a lone wolf, 22-year-old tranny who wrote a perfect, whatever it was, text message to his lover or whatever. All the issues about taking a weapon apart. I mean, I could get into the technical details because I asked. I went and sat down with experts, and I said, teach me about these things.
Ballistic stuff?
Yeah, I went through all that with experts, with people who are snipers, people who are ballistics experts, people who are weapons experts, people who looked at the various footages. Too many questions out there. So what? So what? Right? What does Mike Flynn want? What Mike Flynn wants is our government, and it can be Kash Patel, or it can be Pam Bondi, it can be somebody from the White House, but I think Kash is probably the right guy, to stand there and tell the American people, look, we are still investigating this. We don't have, we have some evidence. We have a lot of evidence, maybe. I mean, it was clear that they dirtied up the crime scene for certain. There's no doubt about that. So just level with us, because the assassinations of the 1960s, particularly the assassination of a sitting president of the United States by elements of our own government, which has now been validated by the latest release of information, and they still haven't released everything, even though Trump said we're going to release everything. They still have not released everything. But that's what I want Kash Patel to do. I want somebody from our government.
You want him to come up and say, we're still doing the
investigation. We're still looking. We don't know yet.
It takes time.
We don't know yet. And
I
these
think
things,
that's fair.
yeah.
I think it takes time.
I mean, it's absolutely fair. And in fact, if I were in government, I would say in a White House meeting, this is what you must do. Stop all this nonsense about we've caught our guy. There's just been too much. And what it does is it damages. And it continues to eat away and erode the trust between the people of this country and the government. And that's the one thing that must be rebuilt. People want to trust our law enforcement. They want to trust our government. They want to trust Trump. They want to trust Kash Patel. I do. But this particular issue with Charlie Kirk was such a seminal event in the history of the United States of America. And it smells bad. It looks bad. The old duck thing, right? If it looks like a duck and walks like a duck, then it's a duck. And so something about it is not right.
Well, this is from this book that I'm reading on JFK, which was recommended to me, called Unspeakable. And this is from 62 years ago, November 22nd, 1963. You mentioned the assassinations of the 1960s. But the Dallas and bear with me for about 30 seconds.
Yep.
But the Dallas and Bethesda doctors who changed their testimony under stress, who lied out of fear for their lives, or who followed orders, we've heard that one before, in not probing wounds and then stonewalling questions, were not alone. They joined in a larger conspiracy of silence that would envelop our government, our media, our institutions, and virtually our entire society. From November of 1963 to present, the promoters of the systemic evil involved in killing the president counted on our repression and denial of reality. They knew that no one would want to deal with the elephant in the room. The doctors who saw that truth staring up at them from the dead body, who then backed away from it, were not unique. They are symbolic of us all. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
so two words that
Yeah,
you
I want
use,
your
okay?
reaction to
Evil, and denial. So there's actually something called counter denial operations or denial operations in this war of information, right? So the doctors that were part of all of the machinations at the end when Kennedy was his body was recovered and all that, and everybody that went through that. There's so many people that kept their mouths shut, right? Kennedy was just a data point. Kennedy and the CIA director at the time were at odds with each other. But when Kennedy was assassinated, they created this commission and to look into to investigate the Kennedy assassination. And one of the people on the commission happened to be a guy named Senator Ford, right? Senator Ford.
Future president.
Future president of the United States, okay? Very interested. So the word or the phrase conspiracy theory was developed by the CIA out of the Kennedy assassination. So anybody that talked about the assassination at the time, and there were many that talked about it, they were using the media and their minions in the media, which they still have, to use the word conspiracy theory and call him a conspiracy theorist. That phrase came out of the Kennedy assassination developed by the CIA. Okay? So Ford is on this commission. Fast forward, Nixon gets the boot, right? So Watergate, and what we're dealing with today is vastly much larger in scale than Watergate. So Nixon steps down, and Agnew at the time, Agnew was his vice president. Agnew had to step down, and they planned all this, very intentional. There's great books written about this. So Agnew had some New York thing that was like a weird type of activity that he was involved in, some type of fraudulent activity. And so he steps down. Nixon is the president, and all this is happening at Watergate. They all knew it was going to happen. So what does Nixon do? He's got to appoint a VP. He steps down. Ford comes in, and then Ford then has to appoint a vice president. Mm-hmm. So Ford is not elected by the United States of America. He's not elected. So the outcome of Watergate, which was directly related to this commission, okay, mm-hmm. back to Kennedy's assassination. So it's like, who's manipulating this? Who is connecting all this shit, right? So you have Ford, who gets put into the presidency. Who does he bring in to be his vice president? Rockefeller, okay, out of New York. And so yet now have a president and a vice president because of Watergate, which is really, at the time, it was spying, right? Little tiny bit of spying at that time, which they were doing.
Yeah,
and
the new stuff seems to
it's like, oh my God, now
that.
we're using all this sophistication and media manipulation in a much different way. So this ebb and flow of corruption inside of our government, and you look at and you see these names that pop up over time, right? And you kind of go and you say, sitting here today with you, talking about the JFK assassination, or starting off with Charlie's assassination and murder, which is just so tragic, and you kind of go, wait a second, folks, America, and to our government, they're not going to get away with this. They're not going to get away with this anymore.
How do you know that?
Well, because the American people, as Victor Davis Hanson talks about this counter-revolution, we have decided. I think the majority of Americans have decided that we're just not going to do this anymore. We're not going to put up with this anymore.
You mean we've decided that recently?
Fairly recently. I think probably in the last year.
Because the devil's advocate would say they did get away with the previous situation.
Yeah, and they're still, to a degree, they're still getting away with some of it, because until we start to see real, true accountability, then maybe they will get away with it. But I think from an American citizen's perspective, and the sentiment that I feel from those that are American citizens out there in the country, they're kind of going, hey, when is this going to stop, right? And it will only stop, as I said earlier, if people decide to get involved in their communities. That's the only way it's going to stop.
It starts with the individual. We do have some individual callers. Nick, are they ready? We have subscribers to OMG, and I think that's a good place to pivot. It starts with you and your community. I agree with you, and I just want to make a comment that I think it actually, on a personal level, I think it starts with the individual being willing to tell the truth.
Right.
Because people always say, James O'Keefe, what can I do? I almost sometimes feel, General Flynn, that people like to complain to make themselves feel like they're doing something.
Right.
But the action is to tell the truth. We have caller on the line, Paul, and these are just audience people calling in who are our subscribers. They get to ask a question. Paul, are you there? Paul? No? We'll come back to Paul in a minute. But we have some subscriber questions written down. We'll try to get that. We'll try to get Paul on the air. But a couple of our subscribers did not want to call in live because it's a live show. They wrote me the question, so I'm going to. Oh, we have another caller? Go ahead. We have another Paul. There's two Pauls. Apostle Paul. Paul, are you there? Paul? Maybe it's the same Paul.
Is he trying to call back, maybe?
Maybe he's trying to call back. We don't hear Paul,
keep
so
trying, Paul.
Producer will keep trying, but in the meantime, as soon as he comes on the air, we'll let him speak up. But in the meantime, I'm going to read you. We've got about 5 questions from our subscribers.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of a lightning round, so we'll do about a minute per question. First question is from anonymous subscriber. General Flynn, what and when was the first instance that you knew that you were being railroaded? Can you think back to that moment?
Yeah, I think that it was probably the summer of 2017, particularly when they really started to hone in on other aspects of my family, and I've talked about Michael already. So they really started to sort of try to drive a wedge between my son and I, and that was really. Then I knew that, wow, this is not good, and I became a target, not a subject of their investigation. And that was roughly, if I remember right, around the August of 2017 timeframe.
2017.
It was a difficult time.
General Flynn, what do you have to say to encourage disillusioned Army officers who resign due to the Biden vax mandate? I get these a lot.
Yeah,
I get thousands and thousands. Respectfully, Mary from Arizona.
Mm-hmm, Mary. So thanks for that question. Actually, there's about 80,000 that were affected. 80,000 uniformed service military personnel. About 80,000 that were affected. The Department of Defense has done, or Department of War. I know Pete Hegseth's intent is to get this thing fixed. The services are not doing a good job right now of basically getting people that want to come back in to serve. Want to get back pay, want to get their ranks restored. I mean, there needs to be a better, more organized process run probably by the Secretary of War himself, with somebody who he trusts to get it done and have it, like, for anybody that's ever been in the military, you go to a new duty station, there's a place called One Stop where you get everything done. We need a kind of a one stop to get this issue resolved, because we can't have people on the streets of America that served in our armed forces out there with this kind of a lousy story. Because what my responsibility is, as I go around the country, is to try to find people who want to serve our country in uniform, because it's a noble cause. So, Mary, don't give up. Don't give up. And I know that Secretary Hegseth's intent is to fix this problem, but he's running into headwinds just below him.
Okay, I think we have now Paul on the line. Apostle Paul, can you hear me? Producer? This is live television, guys. This is how it goes. We can't hear him. Nick? It says connected, but I don't believe we can hear him, hear his voice.
He's texted to us?
Let's go to the other caller. Next caller. Live television, everybody. This is always fun. We don't hear the voice. Producer? Paul, can you hear us? Nope. No volume. We'll keep working on it. Let's go to the next question we have written from our subscribers. This is very generic. And I do have your letter to America. I read all your books. Yeah. And you kind of lay out some of the values here just to set the context for the question we're about to get. Right. And you say 5 points for America's future. So it is in General Flynn's book regarding what solutions are. First, second, third, and fourth: educate the citizens, revitalize faith, promote families, promote industry. But the question is very generic. What concrete, specific actions, maybe 2 to 3 actions, can we take to set America right again?
I do believe we have to restore trust in government. It has to happen. I think Trump is the guy to do it. We've talked about it on the show here today. Some of the areas where trust has to be restored. And that's just a matter of being honest. Just be honest with the American people. We can take it. I think that's number
You
one.
mean the politicians?
Yeah, politically, the trust, this level of trust that we need between our institutions of government and the American people. Just be honest. If you don't know something, say it. The second thing, I think we have to relook our foreign policy. I think our foreign policy right now is a bit chaotic. I don't like the fact that we're in all these wars. I don't like the fact that we spend billions of dollars overseas when we've got homeless veterans, for example, here in America, and other problems here in America that we could take that money and put here. That would be America first. I think that the third thing is, and it's really more at the local level, I think that there's got to be, a component of it is to eliminate the education department at the federal level and turn education back over to states and mothers and fathers. The education as a component of our future, not just the children, but the actual things that we learn are super important. So those are three areas that I think need to happen. I think that they need to happen. There's probably a few others in there, but those are three.
All right. Next question. We have a couple live callers that we're just sorting out a tech issue, so we'll just have another about 5 minutes with General Flynn. But this question is about Mark Milley. That's the former chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, right?
Right.
What penalty has Mark Milley paid? What penalty has he paid? That presupposes he has paid a penalty for his subversion of the American people in the previous administration.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a tough one for him. I know that there is some type of an investigation. I understand inside of the Department of War against General Milley. I know Mark. I knew him. I was deployed with him to Afghanistan a number of years ago.
You were deployed with Milley to Afghanistan.
Yeah, and I'd worked with him over the years prior to him getting into the more senior jobs that he was in, Chief of Staff of the Army and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. There's very possible that he could get discovered. They may, in some type of investigation that they're doing, he could get reduced in rank, which would be pretty severe. Just the personal stuff. They've taken his big up. They do these framed pictures of everybody in the halls of the Pentagon. They've taken his picture down. I think he did go over the top with some of the statements that he made. He should have never said them. He should have stuck with being a military officer, a military professional, instead of crossing a political line, which it appears that he did.
What do you think the worst statement he made was?
I think when he was in front of Congress, where he talked about, I forget the exact phrase, where I want to understand white something. It was just a ridiculous response. I forget the exact line. I mean, somebody in your audience, I'm sure, knows what I'm talking about. But it had to do with white supremacy or something like that. It was just dumb. Come on, we serve in the military. Nobody cares in the military. And I've said this many times. We don't care if you're purple with pink polka dots, as long as you can achieve a standard. And everything in the military has a standard. This business about whites, blacks, whatever color you are, doesn't matter. It's a standard. And if you can achieve it, you can pass it. I'm not going to lower the standards for you so you can make it. That's what the DEI nonsense does. But Milley allowed a lot of that stuff. So he's going to have to live with that for the rest of his life.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people feel that these people are guilty of treason. That's the view of the subscriber. Another subscriber question. We're going to actually have the individual call my cell phone and put it on speaker just to sort out the technical issues here in a moment. We got one more written question, which was how your Catholic faith helped you. Oh, wait a second. Before we get to that question, I believe we have Paul.
Good.
Finally. Hey, Paul.
Thanks for trying. Thanks for keeping me.
Okay, Paul, you're live on everywhere, Instagram, X, YouTube. We're sitting with General Flynn. Thank you for subscribing to OMG and supporting our journalism. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes. Okay. My question is, all right, I've read all General Flynn's books, and I got a friend that's going through something. This war in our minds is getting out of control with AI and the information warfare. He was just completely MAGA, and he's losing it. My question is basically this: I've tried everything. What can I do to pull it back? I've tried everything, and it's getting to the point where it's just unbearable. I'm getting back to the books. I'm sorry about your loss of
Boone.
Boone Cutler, General Flynn.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for that question, and I feel for your friend. Boone taught me a lot. Boone Cutler, co-author of the 5GW book and a great friend, just recently died. He taught me a lot of things, and one of the things he taught me was about this business of making sure that we have somebody who we can talk to, right? Make sure everybody has a mission. And so, Paul, your mission is to make sure that your friend has a mission in life. And I don't know what the whole background and issues are, but just understand that there's a lot of people out there that are struggling. And we've talked a little bit about this today's show with trying to figure out what's going on. And understand that sometimes you just got to get out of this bubble, this cocoon that we are in, and go. One of the things that Boone did for me, probably among a number of things, was to restore my faith in myself and in my religion. I'm a Catholic, right? So, I would just say to really don't lose sight of how powerful faith can be.
Thank you, Paul.
I did push my faith on him as well. I'm very religious myself, and I'm trying everything. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Continue your good work. I appreciate it.
Here's our next caller. We're doing this the old-fashioned way on speaker. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. What's your name, sir?
Paul Sutliff.
The other Paul. Now we have both Pauls. Paul Sutliff, you're live
It's good.
on The Price is My Life with General Mike Flynn. Go ahead and ask your question.
I was made aware that you might have had a plan to deal with the Muslims' war against North America when you were up for national security chief, and I'm hoping you could share something on that.
Yeah, good question. And so a number of things that they were concerned about, and this is one of the reasons why Obama warned Trump not to have me, because I'm not anti-people. I'm anti-ideologies that are not compatible with the United States of America, right? So you come into this country, you assimilate into this country, you abide by our rules and our laws, and learn the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Learn the Constitution. So I know, and when I was serving as the national security advisor, even though for a brief period of time, I did bring a certain couple of things in front of President Trump, and I'll leave it at that, just because it's, to this day. But it had to do with this issue. And so, because I lived it, I served and fought against this radicalized ideology. I understood it very well. I consider myself a subject matter expert in it, and I've written books about it. Right. I was looking at these enemies and what I now call the axis of resistance inside of our country, and we're seeing it now play out on the streets of America in a big way. And these are anti-Americans, right? These aren't. Everybody can get all wrapped around the axle about Zionists and Jews and Israel, but it's more than that. There's an axis of resistance inside of our country, and that component of it is part of that axis.
Thank you very much for the question, Paul. Appreciate it very much.
Good.
One more subscriber question, written question now. Unless we have any other callers, let me know. But I think this is the last question. Well, by the way, before I ask this question, I also read in your book, The Field of Flight. I think you wrote this in 2016, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Before all the stuff happened.
Yeah.
A leader is responsible for helping others see something in themselves and then helping them maximize their potential. You were talking about O'Connell.
Mm-hmm. Tom O'Connell.
O'Connell.
Right.
And I think that's true. I think a leader is responsible.
Yeah,
for
he
the
taught
team.
me that when he was my first battalion commander when I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. He's actually he's from another guy from Rhode Island, actually from the hometown next door to mine, and he was a lieutenant colonel. I was a lieutenant, and he and I worked with each other over the years. And he's the one that taught me that early on. He said, that's one of your responsibilities is to look at people, look at the soldiers that you got, people around you, and maximize their potential. Because you find somebody, and they join the military. I'll just use the military. You join the military, and you join as a truck driver, right? But you find out that you're a really good, engine repairman, or you're a really good, or you can fly a helicopter, right? I mean, sometimes you start something for one reason, and then you realize when you get into it, you go, wow, I'm actually pretty good at these other things. Well, then go for it. Find your passion in life and maximize that passion and bring it to life, right? Maximize your potential. And I think if I've done anything for people that I've worked around in my military career was to try to do that for them as much as possible.
That requires discernment, knowing what
Big
someone
time.
is
Yeah,
good
big
at.
time. Yep.
Okay. How about your faith? You're Catholic.
Yep.
How has your Catholic faith helped him? This is from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
And about General Flynn's honest thoughts on the Christians being divided over Christian denominations.
Yeah, but there's a lot of that. There's a lot of division right now within the Christian Christian community, the various faiths within the Christian, component of religion. A lot of that, and some of it's intentional. It's actually being intentionally done. I mentioned, the Methodist and the Episcopalian churches as an example. Their leadership. You kind of look at the leadership and you go, wait a second. If you believe in the Bible and you believe in these tenets and these doctrines, then how can you, it doesn't jive. The Catholic faith in America, I have in my book, Field of Fight there, I actually, there's a part of it in there where I go after the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church for the scourge of pedophilia in the Catholic Church with priests and bishops, Rome tried to use canon law in courts in America, and good enough for a judge up in Boston. He said, nope, we follow the Constitution. We don't follow your canon law. Well, for those that are listening and monitoring and watching closely, you have elements of another ideology, another faith in this country that are trying to use Sharia law, within cities in our country. So we only have one law, it's the Constitution. The Catholic community, as a man of, as a Catholic who grew up as a Catholic, I'm imperfect. I can name all the priests and churches I've been to, and always worked in them, volunteered. I do think that we have to be good to others. I'll repeat this. My father taught us to apply the golden rule, which is really a rule for everybody, but it's to treat others like you like to be treated. And I think that comes from our Catholic faith. And that's what I would like to try to be. I don't want to be hateful, vindictive, scornful. I want to be somebody who is helpful and optimistic about what our future holds. And our future will hold those positive things only if we decide to get involved in our country.
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Yep.
Or greater love is no more than a man laying down his life for his friends.
Yeah, big time.
Well, did I miss anything you want to cover? I know we covered a lot. We could talk for hours, but is there anything you wanted to say beyond what you've said?
Well, I just want to say that for this audience and for those that hear this message, that what I think that you do, because we've met before and spoken before, and I'm a big fan of courage. And they always say courage is contagious, right? Courage is contagious. But actually, courage is a decision before it becomes contagious. So you have to make a decision. This is really for everybody that's listening. And I'm using you as the example of courage, because it doesn't come without fear, but it requires a decision. So I think the American people need to make a decision for all of us to now be courageous. And we can be courageous together. And once we're courageous, then that contagion of courage and this courageous application of our voices and what we do becomes even more important. And we can change things. We can change. We've seen it in the world of social media where somebody, says something about a particular beer, and then the American people go, well, we're not going to put up with that, right? So I think for you and your team and what you do is an example of courage, and it's a decision that you've made, and I'm honored and blessed to be here today with you, and I appreciate your patience to getting me here, and your team's patience. So thanks very much.
Thank you, General Flynn. It's been great talking to you.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
James.
This morning, when I woke, I couldn't stop hearing teardrops on my ceiling, falling from the eyes of the beautiful angel I had slaughtered. Hold me, ignoring what you told me, only for a moment. Everything is fine and the beautiful golden path unfolding. Anger in response to my emotion, all the trauma left unopened. Throw it all away and fly inside, get high, good times I'm reeling from the raindrops on the ceiling. From your heart this is revealing. You wanna get away, you're bored into my But what are you every so
feeling.
afraid of? Isn't that what life is made of? When you think about all you gave up, when you think about all the glamour and the money that they sold you, when the raindrops hit your ceiling, will you see a human being? Will you open your eyes or avoid the things this is revealing?
I survived what they sent to destroy me, resurrected like a biblical story. They thought that it was the old me, but it ain't the old me, it's the bold me. I survived what they sent to destroy me, resurrected like a biblical story. They thought that it was the old me, but it ain't the old me, it's the bold me. Yeah, I'm looking dangerous now. Yeah, they're looking anxious now. Yeah, look at their faces now. Yeah, how did they make it out? Yeah, I had to break it. I'm talking that family curse. Everyone said I wouldn't make it, spoiler alert.
Man, what are you so afraid